This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Find great deals faster.
Hello, and welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. This podcast is designed by real people on their journey to achieving financial freedom, and we'll focus on people who've either already attained it, who are joining us on that journey, or maybe a specialist topic that can help you build your technical knowledge to achieving and maintaining that financial freedom. We hope you enjoy it. Hi folks, and welcome to today's episode. We're going to be focusing on one of our technical talks today, where we have a topic that we're going to go through that will hopefully help you on your journey to achieving or maintaining your financial freedom through property. Today's topic is really impactful. It's one of the most sought after knowledge bases, I think, within the property space. I think that's probably right. And we're going to be focusing on commercial to residential conversions. And with me, as always, is my partner in crime, but also somebody who's got a little bit of experience in this stuff. I would have thought
a little bit,
pushing a couple of decades now. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Nice sunny day in Manchester again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not bad for an April. Yeah, we're in April when we're recording this. So yeah, right. So let's crack straight on. So explain to me on a basic level, like I'm a 5-year-old, what is a commercial to residential conversion? What is it?
Yeah, so you've got an existing commercial property that could be, various different sort of uses, you could say. So you got things like office blocks, shops, retail shops, light industrial units, all those sort of things that can get converted into a residential. So repurposed, you get that property, you get an approval, and then you convert it into a residential property. And I think today we're going to focus on, say, conversions that could be either conversions to, say, like a block of flats or a few flats. It could be mixed use, so you could keep a commercial shop on the ground floor and do some, shops above, and also conversions to one of our specialist topics, which is HMOs as well.
Yep.
The approvals for these can be quite different as well, which we'll get into more detail about.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of why we're talking about this, why has it become so popular? What are the opportunities that you see?
So I think the main, so there's a few things really, but firstly, with what's going on in the world in the last few years and everything like that economically, the high streets and the traditional areas with lots of commercial properties, the demand for having on-site locations or on-site commercial properties isn't as high as it probably used to be.
Impact of Amazon and
basically we're in a digital world now, aren't we? We're a digital revolution.
COVID.
We're not restricted by geography as much as we used to be. So for that reason, like more shops and commercial type businesses are going online or digital, which means that the buildings that they used to be in are either, empty, underutilized, et cetera. And also on the flip side, from a residential perspective, we're a small island in the UK, rising population, undersupply of housing, government hasn't kept up with housing targets for as long as I can remember. So there's a good opportunity to develop those properties, which already have these sort of bricks and mortar, like they've already got the structure built. So you can just repurpose the internal elements to create housing, which is needed for businesses or commercial buildings that are just not being used anymore or underutilized.
Okay.
On top of that, there's some sort of planning rules in place which are called prior approval permitted development rights to convert, say, an existing commercial building into, say, blocks of flats and things like that exist. And what that means is you still need planning approval. It's not a full planning application.
Before you jump ahead, so I'll just ask the next question.
Does it relate to this topic? Is that what you say?
Yeah.
Good stuff.
So the question is, so what is the planning? So to convert one thing into another, usually changes the use of that property. So we're talking about changing the use of a commercial property into a residential property.
That's it.
So what are the planning use classes and what are the permitted development rights that exist within that framework?
Right. So so what happened a few years ago is that some of the commercial use classes got grouped together into what is called a Class E, use class. Mm-hmm. So I can't remember how many there used to be in that class, but let's say that
A1 to like B3 and
maybe like 7 or 8 or something like that were their own individual use classes. Now they're all just grouped into a class called Class E.
Yeah, so the typical one is a shop and an office. With
shop and office, light industrial, probably like the few of the key ones that are under that use class now.
Yep.
So now what you can do is you can convert a Class E property into, under prior approval permitted development, into, say, flats under that route. So there's a maximum size. I can't remember if it got upgraded, but it used to be 1,500 square meters in size.
Yeah, I think it's bigger now.
Yeah, so it may have gone up recently. There was definitely consultation about it, depending when you listen to this podcast, of course.
I don't know whether that's been, I know that it's consulted on, but I don't know whether that's been into force. I'm not sure. They usually do it around summertime, don't they?
So if you think 1,500 square meters is quite a big amount of space, you could get, 40 flats in a space like that if you had a building of that size.
Yeah, so if we're looking at landlord, developer, people who probably are going to be listening to this, I mean, that's big enough, right?
Yeah, the niche for, when you look at small scale developments, maybe 4 or 5 flats up to like 15 or 20 is like maybe a good sweet spot range to look at, because when you get bigger than that, you might compete against bigger development companies. You get smaller than that, it's your basic landlords that can do that as well. So yeah, it's a sort of a niche area to get into.
So you mentioned prior approval. What do you mean?
So prior approval is you have to apply for planning, but you've got the prior approval to do those works, as long as you comply with, I think, 6 key checks or requirements. So there's not a full public consultation process like you do a full application. There's just key checks you have to do for things like, noise, flooding, highways, do a check for safety, bits and pieces like that. So I think there's waste removal. Yeah. So there's 6 key checks. And as long as you meet those checks, it should get approved within 56 days, I think, of validation. Whereas a full planning application could be a bit longer. There could be a lot more noise and consultation with public and complaints and objections and all those sort of things, which you don't necessarily get or you can't take on board for a prior approval application in theory.
You missed a big one, so which I quite like because it extends the question.
Right.
One of the big ones is you have to meet the National Living Space Standards.
Yes, very true. Yeah. And which is actually one of the challenges, to be honest, because the minimum space standards for a flat to do a studio flat now is 37 square meters. And everything goes up from there depending on...
What if I want a bath?
Yeah, so bath, I think, goes up to 39 meters. Yeah,
it's tough, isn't it?
It's a weird one, isn't it? But like, a bath, you
put a shower in, 37.
Yeah, 37 with a shower. But like, it's weird, isn't it? Like,
somebody was paid to do that.
Who is ever going to check whether there's a bath or a shower in the future? Because they've got this table, which is obviously written by people in the government, bureaucrats that aren't actually developers, because it makes absolutely no sense, really. Because it's like size.
And that's a single occupant on one level.
Yeah, single occupant on one level with a shower. Technically, it's 37 square meters. And then it goes up from there depending on how many bedrooms there are, bath or shower, how many floors it's on, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a table you can find online. Yeah. So that's one of the key requirements. And the reason that's challenging is because it just looks at floor space. That is it. Yeah. And everyone out there knows that. So 37 square meters for a studio is a relatively big size. You can actually do studio flats that are, say, 20, 25 square meters that are designed really, really well and really effective. Yeah. That could be much better than like a 37 square meter studio that's designed horribly and doesn't use space well or whatever. It's like long and narrow or whatever. But technically that complies. So that's one of the key restraints, which sometimes
I think there is a width though, isn't there? A building reg. I think it's like a 2 point.
Building regs, yes, but not planning. So if the planners are smart and go, actually, they couldn't do that under building. So technically, you could get an approval for planning that doesn't comply with regs because it's just
it meets the national.
They just don't know, and it meets the space standards. But then you might not be able to develop under building regulations. So you want to do a bit of a plan check before you submit as well, just to generally make sure the layouts work.
Okay, let's talk deeper on planning use classes. Then, so you've talked about, so what we're talking about is you've basically said you have some permitted development rights.
Yeah.
And the typical use classes for those are things like offices, retail spaces, light industrial,
Yeah, I think banking and gaming type places fall under the Class E class as well.
Yeah, the banking is definitely.
Pubs do not.
Yes. So let's talk about that then. So
I think churches don't. There's like a couple of key examples because they're sort of protected in a way from the framework.
So if I'm doing a prior approval planning application, it's a 56-day consultation. Yeah, but it's only internal.
56-day process. It should be overall from validation.
Yeah, but it's an internal consultation with the council. Does it meet these standards?
Yeah.
And like you said, it's obviously the space standards, but then it's the waste, highways, noise,
Flooding,
environmental. So
we
tick all of those boxes, and then the council still publish it because they publish all applications, plan applications.
Yeah, it still goes on the planning portal.
Yeah, they get 30 objections and nothing, but they're not. That's not taken into account. It's already permitted to.
I believe in theory, they can only take on board any comments that relate back to those key areas or the things that they can actually consult about. So in theory, yes.
So and then you can just move ahead. And also, the rule is if it goes above 56 days and you don't agree extension, technically, you can just go ahead.
I believe so. Yeah, I haven't experienced that. I haven't tested that yet personally.
I'd get some proper advice on that, but I believe so.
As everything with this, get a planning consultant and get proper advice, because these are just our experiences and what we've dealt with and things like that.
Okay. So then I see this lovely pub that's been derelict. It's fallen to pieces. So lovely is in the old air quotes.
Yeah.
It's fallen to pieces, and I want to do it. What do I have to do?
So if you wanted to convert like a pub into a residential building, let's say 6 flats or something like that, work from the space standards, you'd have to do a full planning application. I can't remember the exact use class of a pub or whether it's a sui generis.
Normally sui generis.
Sui generis, which is Latin for class of its own. So you do a full planning.
No two pubs are the same.
Full planning application, full public consultation. There'd be extra requirements under the planning policy that you'd have to comply with. So as a simple example, you might have to make sure there's parking for the 6 flats, whereas a prior approval, you may not need to. So that's just a direct comparison of something that could be different.
Same with
anything. And it might be in a conservation area, so you got to consider, those factors. You might need heritage statements and bits and pieces like that. There might be certain specification of windows that you could only do because of the area it's located in.
And the problem with things like places, the reason that they've not been included is their community interest buildings.
Yeah.
Right. So traditionally, if it's not in the Class E now, it's because it may have a community interest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Which is like a church as well as another example, similar sort of thing.
Yeah. Leisure centre and stuff like that, which I don't think is included.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. So we've looked at some. We're looking really then as a landlord developer, the best use class for us is therefore Class E.
Yeah. Another key one is Class MA.
Well, okay. We'll do that in a sec.
Right.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
So Class E is the use class.
Yes.
Because we can convert that directly to what you talked about, which is a dwelling house.
Yeah.
Which is Class C3.
3.
Yeah, perfect. So E to C3 is what we're looking to do. And we're going to move from planning use class to permitted development class.
Right.
Which there are 2 permitted development classes. They're still classes. Don't know why they do that. Just to confuse everybody a bit further. Could have called it something else. But 2 permitted development use classes. One is
Class MA.
Class MA. And the other one?
Class E.
G.
Oh, G.
G. So E is the
use.
use.
Saying over and above the...
Yeah. So E is the use class of the property. Then we're going to... So the use class of the property using the permitted development...
It's Class E.
Is Class E. Yeah. And we're going to convert that to the other use class, which is use class C3.
C3.
Because it's only... The way I remember it is, what am I using it for?
Yeah.
That's the use class. What am I doing to change it? That's my permitted development right class, if you like.
Correct, yeah.
So yeah, Class MA is the typical one that we use, certainly. But there's also Class G that you could also look at.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. What's Class MA from a permitted development standpoint?
So Class MA is like you're converting, flats above shops, basically. Shops with uppers, you'd call them in the UK. So you can convert, space above a shop to, I think, every individual commercial.
You got it the wrong way around.
No, I'm not.
Class MA.
Yeah, Class MA.
So Class MA is you can convert the whole thing if you wanted. G is uppers.
Right.
Yeah. So G is uppers.
Right. So Class G is the...
Uppers.
Right. So, so you got a commercial building below. You can convert the space above that to 2 flats.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah? So if you got 2 commercial units on the ground floor, you can convert like 4 flats above that in essence.
Yeah.
So that's Class G.
That's Class G. And there's some sneaky tricks you can do with that, right? So we know people that have... Because if you buy a commercial unit, you have a permitted development right to break that commercial unit into smaller commercial units if it's under Class E. Right, you don't require planning for that. So if you bought a 3-berth commercial retail unit, which was probably would be effectively the same size as 3 terraced houses, and then you broke it up into 3 shops on the ground floor. When it was 1 commercial unit, you could put 2 flats above.
Yeah.
If you break it into
3, you can do
as long as the space on the
do 6 flats above.
Allow, you can do 6 flats above.
Yeah.
So there is things that you can
Obviously
I shouldn't call it sneaky, actually. That's the wrong word. But there's some clever planning engineering.
Well, it's not necessarily sneaky, because depending on what you use it commercially.
Yeah.
If you once had a big flooring shop or whatever, like a big retail space.
Yeah.
And then you can split that up, and it might be like a cafe down there. It might be a little banking. You could do various different uses. You could just have a display area at the front or something. So commercial, there's no.
Yeah.
Depending on the business and the use, it could be very small space you need or a large space or whatever. It does vary quite dramatically depending on what business comes in to lease that space.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and that's the one that that was designed specifically for that shops with uppers, right?
Yeah.
And that work, so if a lot of it comes down to, have you got the right light? Have you got the right, you'd have to check the whole thing, which
now, because you've confused me before, I need to direct the question back to you. Explain Class MA.
Class MA is a permitted development right where a vacant commercial building that has lost its use, that's what they're looking at, can be converted to, in its whole, under permitted development rights with prior approval to Class C3 residential.
Yeah, so that's basically the class. Yeah, it's using the Class MA, the Class E use class of all those different shops. So,
so they're both Class E. You have to be Class E. G is just shops with uppers. So you'd be keeping the commercial on the ground floor. You'd be converting the uppers. Class MA is you convert the whole thing.
Yeah, which is what we were talking about before.
Which is what we were talking about before. Yeah. But it just goes to show, doesn't it? There's too many acronyms, right?
Yeah.
There's too many stuff, and then you take like sometimes I go, is that G or MA? Even after there's 10
and we do this all the time.
No, exactly. So what are the slips, trips, and falls here then? So I see a lovely commercial building. I do my little diagram, so I could break it up into these flats. I think that's going to meet the national space standards. I'm just going to stick my MA application in. What are the slips, strips, and falls?
So a key one is, this is the absolute key. So if you want to do a straight MA application that we were talking about, where you can do prior approval, permitted development rights to convert to flats, you need to consider a few things. So are there enough windows in that space? So you go like, I can fit 6 flats in there. But when you look at the facade, actually, there's not enough natural light for that to work. Then you have to add in some windows. Windows and external alterations don't fall under that prior approval class.
And this is exactly right. So this comes down to a fundamental understanding of what development is.
Yeah.
Right. So development can wears many hats. So what Class MA or Class G do is they allow you to change the use, right? And changing the use of a building under planning is classed as a development, right?
Yeah.
So if I change the E to C3, I've done a development on that building. If I've done nothing else, if I've done nothing else. But if, like you said, you need to make changes, new door, new windows, new light wells, any of those things.
Which is very common, isn't it? To get a layout to work. Like, it's very rare that you find one of these existing commercial buildings and the existing external facade with the windows and everything works perfectly with the layout. That's the ideal scenario, but it's harder to find, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's exactly right. So chances are you're going to have to put in some kind of additional planning application. So then you've got a decision to make.
Yeah.
Right? This is to, if I'm going to apply for something, how controversial is what I'm doing? It's kind of it's a grey assessment, isn't it? It's not a black and white assessment. It's a grey area assessment. How controversial what I'm doing? How long has the building been empty for? As an example, if it's been empty for years, probably not very controversial. Been empty for just the qualifying period for like Class MA, which is I think 3 months. Something. I think it might be getting rid of that.
Yeah.
So if it's
the consultation was to get rid of that because it was a bit silly just to leave it empty vacant for a few extra months.
The purchase process takes longer than that. Yeah. Right? So it's all commercial buildings pointless.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, if it's not controversial, you do it simultaneously, wouldn't you? Just put them both in.
Yeah. So you can do probably 2 ways, and I've done it in 2 projects recently actually, where we did a external application first,
Yep.
waited for that approval and just said existing commercial inside, but we changed the facade to suit the future
Yep.
layout of flats. And then we got approval for that. Then we put in the prior approval application.
Yep.
So it's a bit long because you got one after the other.
Yep.
But in essence, it's probably the way to reduce the risk the most.
Yeah. So if you've got a more controversial
Yeah.
building and all you're asking for is a couple of roof lights and a door
Yeah.
for existing commercial use at that time,
Or you could do
it's not
those,
really controversial, is it?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, exactly. Or you could do those applications where, like, say you put the external alterations as a full application in first, and then like 2 weeks later do the prior approval application.
Yeah.
So in theory, they assess separately.
Yeah.
But
So if the whole
but you're-
thing isn't controversial, like
Yeah.
converting it to residential is the only use that building could possibly be,
Yeah,
then there's no need to do that.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that first application, second application process is there.
Yeah,
And
otherwise-
that's a judgment call, right?
otherwise you do one full planning application with everything.
Yeah.
But then your residential element,
Would be under MA.
yeah, well, it's a full application at this point, I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
You're just doing the facade, and altogether you're just doing it as a full application.
Yeah.
Then there's a lot more the council can review with policy and public consultation, all those sort of things. So maybe the quickest route because you're just doing one application, but potentially the riskiest in that scenario. So it's 3 different ways to get to the same result, really.
Yeah. And we've done them all, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've fallen foul of one,
Yeah.
which was a conservation area one. Where
Well, that's the other challenge, isn't it? If you're in a conservation area.
Or if it's controversial building.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a heritage asset building.
Yeah.
You know, and if you also need to make a judgment on your building, don't you?
Yeah.
Because if it's just a standard office block, you know, there's no heritage in that.
The other thing to consider is like you've got to either sell these flats or rent them out or whatever. So you look at it from a saleability perspective, and let's say parking, an example, is like, how good is the parking? You know, how many? If we were selling these flats, what's a reasonable amount each flat would need? Whether it's one per flat or 2 per flat, or sometimes there's like a metro station or a train literally around the corner. So you assess those things for sustainable transport. So you need to think about it from that perspective as well, because if you're going to develop something and actually you've got through and there is no parking, and the council sort of let it go, but then you've got loads of tenants and people buying it that don't really have. There's a practical aspect as well you need to weigh up.
Yeah. I think that infringes on our location episode slightly, doesn't it? But
it does, yeah.
But it is relevant. It is relevant. It's very relevant.
Yeah.
And highways is one of the things, right? But it's interesting, isn't it? Because highways is one of the things. But like, if you're doing a retail unit, as an example, and you're putting in, there would be a requirement. And here's a tip, by the way, for 10 flats. And if you think about the space needed for that 10 flats, let's say they're 1s and 2 beds, you've got 40 metre ones and you've got 60 metre ones, right?
Yeah.
So you've got like somewhere in the region of 500 square meters, let's just say.
Yeah.
And they're saying, you'd need 10 car parking spaces and you only have room for 5.
Yeah.
As an example.
But the existing use, I know where you're getting with this, yeah.
But the existing use is commercial.
Yeah, 500 square metre commercial.
And a 500 square metre retail technically needs 1 car per 20 square meters in some locations.
Yeah. So which is much more, isn't it?
Which is more. So even though, yes, your residential would require it, you're actually reducing the impact.
Yeah, so a good tip for this
highways.
is obviously you can put this in your application, but sometimes if you get a professional report from a highways consultant, they'll do the full traffic assessment and recommendation and put those arguments in there on your behalf. You might have to pay 2 or 3 grand for it, but if it's going to help you get your approval, it's well worth doing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But so that's a good one if you're using facade. Another slip, trip and fall. If your building looks like a heritage asset and it isn't listed, it's going to get designated during the planning process as a non-designated heritage asset, which means that you will still require a heritage consultation.
Heritage
and
report as well.
It's almost every time, isn't it? So if it's a standard, like we're saying, is a standard office, you don't have that issue. If it looks, it's one of those. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? So if it, we're talking about it in a minute as a demonstration of all of these things, right? All of these things. I won't go into that, but if it looks like a heritage building and it's got some previous history with the local community, chances are they're going to...
Another real key thing to consider is like the build conversion costs are going to be higher, changing the use class from like a commercial to a residential than you would with like just a basic refurbishment of a building.
Yeah. which is a good bridge actually, because our next question is about that.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that now actually. So just touching on that non-designated heritage asset, it's basically a non-listed grade building that the council designates as important to the community, and therefore they want to control the development.
And like you said, they just add it when you do planning application.
You've already
just add it in because they realise,
you've gone and checked all the listings. It's not listed. Whoop whoop, and then you go and you go, actually no, we're going to designate, and they're allowed to do so. So nothing you can do about that. So just to summarise, if it's got all the windows and light that you need, it's got all the waste elements. And that's another one, isn't it? Because if there's no waste management on site for a commercial unit, you have to build it in. That might come under development.
But again, a practical aspect, isn't it? You do need a waste management plan anyway.
But
the building.
Typically, high streets have got front and back rows running front and back, and commercial waste is removed by a commercial waste removal person during the time of the shops being open. Or whatever, right? Whereas a residential waste has to be bins and delivery, so there may have to be a development.
Yeah, you might have to build it inboard, so you might have to have like a waste bin area in the building that may not have had before. Might be a good spot to add in your sort of like meters for your flats and bits and pieces like that as a communal.
Chances are it doesn't come under permitted.
No.
Yeah, because it's going to require some kind of
some sort of alteration with a door or window, door getting in there and stuff.
But if I've got the waste and I've got the light and everything else matches, then chances are my MA application or my G application will be absolutely fine.
Should be approved.
However, if I need to make changes, there is an additional step. You need to make the changes application, and then you need to make a decision. In summary, is it a controversial one? Is it a non-controversial one?
Yeah.
And then if it's non-controversial, just stick them both in at the same time or do a full app.
Exactly,
Or if it's controversial, stage it out, do your facade stuff first, the external development stuff first, and then go for the MA once you've got the...
As anything, use a planning consultant, seek their advice and work out the best solution. And you as a developer...
Just our experience, isn't it?
You as a developer, weigh up all the scenarios and what can go well, not go well, and you gotta weigh up the risk and decide the best way to move forward, really.
Yeah, good stuff.
Stop the podcast now. This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Property Filter is the #1 property tool for today's property professional. It brings in all the data points and sources from all the property portals and auction sites into one convenient place. Then you have the option to overlay all the clever strategies found in the Property Filter blueprint to find motivated sellers faster. Now, we use it on a daily basis. It saves us over 80% of our time when looking for properties. And if that sounds like something that you want in your lives, please go to register.property-filter.co.uk/PPB, which is the discount code for this podcast. You will get 2 weeks free and a discount on your first month. That's it from me. Back to the podcast.
Right then. So now we're going to talk about it. So we're talking about, it's pounds, shillings, and pence, this question, but the question is wrapped up in the building regulations. So what are the challenges to look for during the build program, or what are the key things to look for within the building regulation environments when converting commercial to residential?
Yes, I think some of the key things are when you're up front, you got to look at the cost, or you got to do some cost estimates. When you're converting or changing use, there's some key requirements that you may not have to do for a basic refurbishment. So, when you look at the building regulations, you're talking about Part L upgrades for thermal things. You might have some acoustic requirements you got to do, fire requirements. So use the example of the Class G, where you might be keeping shops on the ground floor. You're developing the above to flats. You've got to noise and fire protect and seal between those units for safety reasons. You've got to comply with all those regulation requirements because you're doing a complete change of use. So there's a decent amount of cost involved with that. There might be some structural alterations and all those sort of things you've got to do. You might have to do acoustic tests because there's acoustic testing requirements you've got to do between, say, the commercial and the flats, and also flat to flat.
Yeah, and even HMO to HMO.
Yes, HMO to HMO, absolutely.
If you're going for planning, converting something, and it's sui generis or it's commercial to residential.
Because think of this way: if you got 2 5-bed HMOs next to each other, they're basically one flat and one flat. So you got to acoustic and fire seal between those units, even if in the same property, like you're saying.
Well, no, absolutely. But some councils now are wanting acoustic separation between rooms. If you apply for planning, so if you're doing something which meets the
acoustics, yes, but not fire necessarily.
Not necessarily.
That's the difference,
Again, though, it's council specific.
Yeah, usually I think from building regulation perspective, I think when you get above 7 or 8 rooms in a HMO, you've got to acoustically test the rooms. Whereas like a development, like a 5 or a 6 bed conversion, you don't have to do acoustic tests between the rooms. But like you say, the fire, it can be more stringent under licensing than actually building regulations require. So that is something to check. Yeah. Definitely something to consider. You have to weigh up licensing and regs at the same time.
It's worth checking with your local building control, private building control, who's got experience with these things.
Yeah.
What the requirement is for because you don't get it until you get the planning condition. Sometimes it can be, sometimes it's too late, right? You've got planning.
Yeah.
And then you've got to acoustically protect each room, each compartmental room, which is obviously beneficial in the long term for the tenants. But if you haven't budgeted it, it can be a bit of a killer.
So another tip early doors as well is to get the acoustic consultant on board. A, because they can support a planning application with requirements, and B, they will help you out with things in that council of what you'll need to do. For your design and regulations.
And just skipping back one as well is if you're doing it with HMO as an example, commercial to residential with HMO element, that isn't the same permitted development as
we should have talked about this before.
We can skip back on that now. Yeah.
Can I cycle back to it?
Yeah,
because we've talked about the conversions to flats. Conversions of commercial property to HMOs, there is no prior approval or permitted development element. So it's always has to be a full planning application for HMO. So that is the challenge. Mm-hmm. Where the opportunity is, because we talk about opportunities, is that when you're converting an empty commercial building in a town centre area to a HMO, the positives are it's usually good location for a HMO because it might be near all the things that work for HMO tenants, employment, train, tram, transport, all those sort of things.
Yeah.
And also because it's not necessarily next to a cul-de-sac of families.
Yeah.
It's unlikely you're going to get loads of objections.
Yeah, your objections is always less, isn't it?
It's always, it should be less. So you don't have the prior approval route, but in theory, it's probably going to be a smoother application to convert to HMO than it would be for ones that you apply for that might have a family living next door and, people that have been living there for years that will want to object.
Yeah, exactly. And the typical question I get asked is, what if I apply for E to C3 and then I use my permitted development rights to C4?
I literally don't want to talk about that in this podcast because it's so grey.
It's a grey area.
It's very grey. So
it's a risk that you would have to be willing to take.
Yeah. So in theory, if you have it as a C3 for a day, and then you move to a C4, which is a small HMO, in theory that could be right. But there's potential grey areas and challenge that. So be very, very
careful. The critical
careful.
question being, have you actually established the C3 use?
Yeah.
Under planning terms. Because if you have, then...
So in theory, let's say you built something that was like, say, a 3-bed flat with a living room.
Yeah.
You built it out and then you went, actually, I could literally just add an ensuite into this living room and convert that into a 4-bed HMO, which is a C4.
Yeah.
That's a very legitimate way to say I did build it as a 3, but actually I worked out that instead of letting out to, a couple or a family, I could rent out per room, and then you change it after. Yeah. Even if it's a short time after, that's a legitimate way to do that as an example. Yeah. The challenge is if you build out the 4 to start with and it never actually operated as the C3 dwelling flat.
Yeah.
There's an argument to say you've skipped the gears there, but it is a grey area. So.
And the argument will only come to play. It's how enforceable these things are, right? So I mean, I don't want to go down the risks and rewards type scenario because I don't want to recommend anything to anybody that I wouldn't do myself. But if you already own a property and you've done the development and you're not planning on refinancing it in the short term, chances are you won't have a problem.
Yeah, I feel like if you bought it with cash and those sort of things, when you've got bridging finance challenges and
if you need to exit onto a term mortgage,
within a swift time frame.
Yeah, so the term mortgage solicitor is going to have a quick look at the planning history of the property, see it's got a C3, and then ask them to get your confirmation from the council that you can use a C4, and in which case you're then going to apply for a lawful development certificate, and at that point, then you need to have provided that evidence of C3 to C4.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all about balance and probability, isn't it, planning? And if you've been operating it as a C4 for 3 years,
it's very much
established as a C4, and the planning officer is probably not going to have a problem saying, oh, yes, it was C3 originally, and then...
It's a weird one that, sometimes there is challenges skipping the gear because, in essence, in an area that doesn't have an Article 4 direction, a C3 dwelling is as the same rights as a C4 small HMO. So it's like, what's the actual problem? Why does it matter if it's here? But anyway,
but you're asking them to confirm something. Technically. And now when I spoke to a planning officer about this particular issue, their response, I won't name them or the council or anything like that, their response was, don't apply for that. You don't need to. We can't enforce anything, but if you apply for it, we can only give you the textbook answer, which is unless you've established the use, it's not ready. So you can't go straight to C4, but you don't need to apply for it because it's non-enforceable because you've got permitted development right to use it. Which is like what I'm saying. How backwards it is, though, right? Some of the things. Like the planning officers know you're doing it. So you just don't want them to tell you to do it.
So if you don't do it because it's the same class, and then you do it just to, let's say because a lender needs it or requested it or something like that, then the councillors actually shouldn't have done that because now I can't enforce anything, but I'm forced to make a decision on something which I'm not even 100% sure myself as the planning officer what the right thing is to do.
Which is challenging, isn't it? It is challenging. So let's flip back to building regs. Let's navigate back. So what we're looking at is a general key differences between building regulations from doing let's say a large residential establishment, let's say a 15-bed former residential property to a flats versus a commercial conversion. What is the key differences and what are the cost implications? Because there are some.
So if you've got a bigger footprint, you have to think life safety systems, fire escape routes, and all the systems associated with that, smoke vents, distance of escape routes, firewalls, all those sort of things, acoustic treatments between rooms. You've also got ventilation requirements as well. So typically, here's an example. So if you're on a main road in a town, generally there could be noise outside, adjacent, things like that. So sometimes when you look at a regulation via planning requirement, so you need the ventilation to operate, and then the council might say, because it's noisy outside, the resident should have ventilation without having to open the windows. So then you might have to
or they may say the windows can't be opened.
That's what I'm saying.
It's on the ground floor.
Or they're saying So sometimes you are going to say we want openable because they've got the choice. But if they don't want to, there's mechanical ventilation. There's a system called MVHR system that can ventilate the room without having to open the window. Or like you're saying, the council might say, well, because of that, it needs to be fixed because we don't want them ever opening it. So they still need the ventilation requirements, which again, that MVHR system or there's like some MEV systems that have like trickle vents that can do that. Whereas like you said, in like a residential area where there's not those noise issues, you may not need to do those sort of things. So that's a bit of an example as well of the differences. And obviously all of these things have a bit of a cost element, don't they? So you got to factor that in. So when you're looking at, a flat conversion, and the build cost to get to regulation, get to a decent spec, because of the minimum space standards, sometimes it's just hard for it to stack up. We're in the northwest of England. There's a decent amount of areas within an hour drive of Manchester that just the flat prices just aren't high enough to warrant the development. Because if you think, let's say as a minimum, you're spending build cost wise, say 50 to 60K on a conversion to a studio. Some areas you're only getting 60, 70K for flats. Then on top of that, you got the purchase price, you got legals, stamp duty.
Regardless of size.
Finance costs and all these sort of things. So you're very much going to lose money if you develop in those areas.
And that's the key issue. There's two key issues with the changes that they made for permitted development. One is that like you said, it's now the
and some of those areas are the ones that need development, but they literally just don't stack up. Unfortunately,
so they up the rights, but then they up the regulations to do with those rights.
Exactly.
Right? So the building regulation rights have got tied to in the last few years, as per the permitted development rights came in. But then the second thing that they did is they made it so large. A lot of the commercial footprints, so like your Class G with uppers, which we talked about earlier, they don't fit.
Exactly.
They just simply don't fit. You can't do 37 square metre flats, a one-bed flat, which means you're left with a two-bed over 2 floors, and that's 68 or something square metres, and you can't do that either.
And the other thing is like if you've got, say, a flat in like the north of England that would sell for 60 grand, like a decent spec, compared to a flat in, what's a rich place in London, like Chelsea or something like that, for £1 million or something like that. And the design and the actual refurb works could be exactly the same. Build cost might be slightly more in London because the labour might be a bit more expensive.
I imagine gold taps, whatever they drink out of.
Well, no, I'm just saying we're doing the same spec. So we've got the same kitchen from Howden. It's the same spec. The build cost might be slightly higher because of the labour element, but that's it. But one can get £1 million and one's worth 60. but it's under the same planning framework. It doesn't consider those variances and stuff like that.
No.
So
no, absolutely.
yeah. So that is a challenge.
There are ways that you can reduce the national living space standards, but it's about and the building regulatory standards. You can relax them slightly, but you'd have to be partnering with a company that already has their own standards approved by the local authorities.
Yeah.
So you're talking about registered housing providers.
This is going to get a deeper conversation, but even regulations, a lot of it is a bit grey as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, what can be designed and what can be agreed with the building control officer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But if you're partnering company or you work for a housing provider, and you've already got your standards signed off by the local authority, you don't need
that. Would generally fall under a different use class though, because if you've got like a care home as an example.
No, C3 still can be C3 flats. So if you have C3 flats and you've got a commissioner with the council that says, yeah, we need these flats at this size for this purpose, generally speaking, you can go ahead with that. But you'd need to do it really carefully because if you think about it, what happens if that provider pulls away? If you're an investor, that provider pulls away, you've then got flats that are below regulationary standard. How are you going to then use them afterwards? But there are ways you can do that. But if you are a provider, then if you've got council support to do and you've already got your space standard signed off, then that's generally okay. From a HMO or a care home perspective, again, if you're already a registered provider of those housing types, you've already got your standard signed off. So they don't come under licensing and stuff like that. They'll still have regulation, but they don't come under licensing in the same way that a private investor would come under licensing, as an example, because you're applying for something that they've already got.
This is a wider debate, so I think we move on. This is a much wider debate.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, but the key things is the cost. So there's other key elements. So if you're keeping commercial on the ground floor, what are the differences? What do you have to do specially to protect the upper floor?
Well, you need to get up to the upper floors. So you need obviously, your staircase, and that needs to be, dedicated access and fire protected and things like that with all the...
Especially if there's only one.
Yeah, so you need that space. You need that to be protected. But also, generally, I think we talked about it before, but I said the separation between the flats and the commercial needs to be acoustically fire treated and all those sort of things.
Yeah.
So I think we've been through that.
Yeah, and the costs are significant. Right? Yeah, it's a significant cost. And it catches people out.
And also sometimes difficult to do because if there's existing shops below, the best way to acoustic and fire treat them is to do the ceiling on the ground floor. But if they're operating and you got no rights to go in and do that work, you're going to have to do it on the floor above, which is
much more expensive.
Generally much more expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, and the key thing to realize is that if you're a typical 5 and 6 bed HMO developer stepping up, as if you then get your lovely approval to do a 8 to 10 bed sui generis commercial conversion, you have to do these things and you have to budget these things in.
Yeah. The key is, you need a decent professional team. We talk about it in the show all the time, but you have to work with the experts in these sort of things. Don't try and wing it. You will get caught out.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to use one of our, just to tie this off as a case study. So we're going to start from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
It's still in build, so we haven't got to the end of the end, if you like, but we're going to talk about until the spade in the ground.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about, how we got there, if that's good.
Yeah, sounds good.
So this is Albert Mill, circa 1861.
Yeah, mill built in 1861.
Yeah.
The latest use was an antique shop, basically.
Correct.
So it fell under that shop category we're talking about. So it was a Class E.
And it is interesting, isn't it? Because it's the last use of the property that we're looking at. As long as it can be established with
established last use, yeah. So in theory, if someone changed the use class and didn't get the permissions, and it wasn't an established, there's an argument that use class was whatever the previous established use class was. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but if you can demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that the current use class is a shop, even though it was originally a cotton mill like this one, then you should be in good standing to put your application in. And this has been used over 10 years as a shop, so it's not.
It was well. In this case, it was well established.
It's not a matter of planning at that point,
and that was never really in dispute and things like that. So we secured the property under an early exchange delay completion, conditional on planning approval of a certain amount of flats.
Yes,
because even at that point we'd measured it, but we hadn't had the full architectural designs and bits and pieces like that.
I've done my drawing. Surely that's enough.
Did you? Oh, you drew up some flats, didn't you?
Yeah. It was
We
almost
should get
good.
that original drawing out,
See what it looks like now.
compare it to the actual scheme and see how similar it was.
Yeah, I've still got it here. But that would be a fun test. That I think I got to put 11 in, and we
Good comparison, yeah. So I think we exchanged based on 11 flats.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we agreed for the planning process that we do 2 stages like we talked about before, where we did a full application because there were some external alterations, some new windows getting put in. We had to dig out an element for a light well to reinstate some windows to get one of the flats.
Put a door on the back as well.
Added some doors, and I think we changed some of the roof lights and stuff as well.
More proliferation of roof lights we needed.
So it was actually a pretty good layout, wasn't it, when you looked at it?
Yeah, it was good, yeah.
Full access around the building, lots of windows.
Yeah.
It was a really good layout for this sort of conversion. But even then, we started
to maximise it. We needed
to maximise it. Yeah, we could have done 8 or 9 flats without adding in those windows, something like that maybe. But to maximise it and get
it's got a car park and things like that, which is good.
It's got a car park at the front, which is great. Laying down the side, we can get a couple of extra parks as well. So yeah, it's worked really well from that perspective. But we decided to de-risk it and do one application after the other. Yeah, which was a fairly slow process, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was slow. Yeah. So the first application, that was the one you were talking about a second ago, which was just for the windows, the doors.
Yes. So that was technically a full planning application.
Yeah.
We got that through.
External development.
Yeah. And then we submitted a prior approval permitted development application for the internal flats. I think we submit it at 11 to start with, I believe.
Yeah, put in at 11, and we used the use class that we talked about.
And typical being a property investor, we tried to skimp a little bit on their waste management and bits and pieces like that to maximise it.
Yeah, and we put in external waste, didn't we, initially?
Yeah.
We didn't really have anywhere to put it. We put it in the car park, I think, and then it wasn't... we were going to look at... Yeah, because we had the flat in the back corner, so we said, there's enough space in the car park. But in hindsight, probably 10 car parking spaces as well. So.
Probably wasn't the best approach. But by the end of it, we took out one of the flats, went to 10, and then we added in the waste management internally, which is actually going to work much better. So that was probably fair.
So the second application was class MA.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is the one we talked about earlier, which is you can convert the whole building. It'd been empty for a little while.
Yeah.
And it was class MA for 11 flats, which we negotiated down to 10.
We agreed 10. It got approved
during the consultation process.
Yeah.
And interestingly, when we did the facade application, we got 2 objections. One being the immediate neighbour.
Yeah, it was like access from his driveway compared to the light well getting dug out and those sort of things, wasn't it?
And the strategy was then to put in the follower application. And when we put the follower application in, we got 20 plus objections, ranging from the sublime to the ridiculous. Which was, one of them was like, can we not just knock this mill down or something like that? Yeah. Which was fun.
And interestingly, just across the road, there was a big mill and like a development where it got converted to flats. So the area, and it's a great residential area. It's a really good location, good for people to live and everything. So it works really well as residential.
Good, So we used Class MA, which meant those comments couldn't be taken into consideration unless they were related to a specific item, which had already been through the checks.
Yeah.
The one check that was the waste management.
So like you said, the public saw it was online.
Yeah.
And they could physically put a comment in.
Yeah.
Which I don't know why they do that for prior approvers. If people can't, if they can't comment, why have it? Because they've just got one system online where you either comment or whatever. So planning officers struggle to understand the difference sometimes between a full application and a prior approval. Yeah. Which means the public is going to understand less again, aren't they? But anyway.
But so 10 flats agreed.
10 flats agreed, yeah. And then once we got the planning approval done, we had a bit of a race because we had to get to completion at the same time.
Yep.
We wanted to, because we're using a combination of bridging development finance, our own funds and another investor's funds to get there. So we had to get all that raised and in place. And at the same time, we were getting what's called the detailed designs done.
Yeah.
So we wanted to get this scheme fully designed out. So when our builders were pricing it, they could accurately price everything and get on and do the work. So that included all interior designs and M&E designs, architectural regulation drawings and everything. So yeah, that was a bit of a challenge and everything to get that moving. But anyway, we got it purchased late last year. In conjunction, got our tender pack ready for the build contractors. They priced it up. Got to position that we agreed a build contract, which started at the start of March this year, which went on to the end of the year this year. So it's about, about a 9-month build process. 9 months.
And a couple of slip, trips and falls on that one, or in any commercial conversion, is do you need a structural warranty or an architect certificate? Because that's come up on a couple of lenders that say, well, you've changed the use from a commercial unit to a residential unit.
So we've decided
we need certainty.
The top end warranty, which is 10-year one.
Yep.
That's what we've decided because we think structural warranty, so that will cover us in the best scenario. And then even then, there's some interesting things that come up, isn't it? Like
we have to guarantee it for 2 years.
Yeah, so the builder under the contract has a 12-month defect liability period, but the warranty provider is saying that as standard as a developer, you have to cover it for 2 years, as an example. So
but even then, it's like some of our HMOs have had requests for that. So like a commercial office to 9-bed HMO.
Yeah, it seems to be a standard thing for anything.
Yeah, I think the smaller one conversions like those can be like architect certificates or PCC. Yeah, and then the bigger ones like the mill, I think that's more relevant to us 10 years.
Yeah, so it's something to consider definitely as you're looking at funding. So
because that can bite you, right? That's a significant cost.
Yeah.
So then the build process is up and running. Strip out started.
We're going to get to a point in a few weeks where the stud work will start going in. Like you said, there's always some, because it was fairly open and stripped out, but even as they've done the strip out, they've found like floor joists that aren't to size and the usual stuff you find on strip out. So again, need a good contingency. We had the budget originally at the moment, even with a healthy contingency, it's under that budget, which is great.
Yeah.
We ended up buying it. So we do some numbers board for 530K, didn't we?
Yeah.
So that was where the flat scenario was interesting, wasn't it? Because we had agreed, was
595.
595 based on 11 flats.
Yeah.
When we couldn't do 11, we could go back to the vendor and say we can't do 11 anymore. The contract's based on that.
Yeah.
We've agreed with the council we can do 10. So that works at 530.
Yeah.
And we agreed that and went on it. And
they were very good with it, the sellers. They were keen on just making sure it happened. They could also, and the good thing about it being open to the planning on the planning portal, it's easy to negotiate at that point. Say, look, you can see all the objections.
Yeah, this is the challenges we've had.
Yeah, we can see that the highways report, which said the best solution is, I think it said 8 or something like that.
Yeah,
8 flats. And we've managed to negotiate down a little bit, but we can't. Obviously, we have a material cost of the purchase. We have to negotiate that per thing. This is the best we can do, and we met them at a price. And in that way, that was helpful, having that all documented and open to the public, because they read it and they could see it black and white and they agreed it. 530 purchase. 530
purchase. I think the overall development cost, which includes all the build works, professional fees, project management works, is about 830. It's going to be or thereabouts.
Yep.
I'll try and remember this, but all the other fees, which is like finance fees, legals, and all those sort of things, something like 200 to 250, or maybe 250, I think it was.
Gulp.
Yeah. So that obviously, if you can fully cash fund it, you save a lot of that if you've got the funds available. And then the final valuation is we're working on about 2.2 million, aren't we? So
So it's about 1.7, isn't it, all in? Something like that.
So costs all in, about 1.7, 2.2 million end valuation. So we've got the options are either to keep it or to sell it. But it's adds 500 grand of equity. But really, end to end, to give an idea of timeline, if you said you've got a year almost for the planning and purchase process, and then close to a year for the build, so it's probably end to end about 2 years.
So 250
start to finish. So 250 equity a year. So that shows what you can do in these sort of developments. As well.
Yeah, and it's still a little bit conservative, on the side of things.
You need to be conservative because you got challenges. We've still got new utility connections to come in. We've got the build process to get through. There are challenges, so you need to be conservative and not be. We are positive people, but you can't be too over optimistic with your numbers.
There's no point.
Because it can bite you.
Kill you in the long run.
And if you do better at the back end, it's a bonus, really.
Perfect.
At the end of the day. Yeah.
Lovely. All right then. So there we go. Commercial to residential. What can be done? How to do it?
Yeah.
A little bit of budgeting.
Opportunities, challenges, everything along the way. So hopefully,
undesignated heritage assets. So the mill got designated during the process.
Didn't it? Planning up. Yeah.
Lovely. All right then. Well, thank you very much for joining us on today's technical episode. I hope that was useful, and good luck with your hopefully commercial to residential conversions, if that's what you're doing on your journey to financial freedom.
Get in touch with us if you want to come visit.
Come see us.
That's it. Or get involved in some of these projects as well.
Take care. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. If you want to get in touch with us about today's podcast or any of the topics, learning topics that we've gone through today, you can email us at podcast@invest-prop.co.uk or get in touch with us with whichever your social media platform of choice is. If you think you would add value to us as a guest on this podcast, you can please get in touch and let us know what you would be able to talk to us about. Other than that, we wish you well on your financial freedom journeys. And once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.